Well, hey everybody, welcome to Distanced by Design. This is a show where we talk about creativity, innovation, and collaboration in the global pandemic. We can't be together in person, but we still hope to use these things to leverage and shape our future. My name is Valerie. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati, and I teach classes on design thinking, innovation, and digital storytelling. And as a part of working on things like that and hosting this show, I get to meet some really interesting people along the way and introduce them to our guests and let them tell some of their perspectives and thoughts on these same things. So my guests today are Valerie Garrett and Brian Trainer. And I've worked with Brian on several projects in the past. I think you'll have no shortage of interesting things to hear about from him, especially even if you just enjoy hearing the story about where he got that jacket. So met Valerie recently as well through a collaboration with Brian, and enjoying getting to know how both of you are working your way through this thing. And I think that everybody will learn a lot from today's episode and hearing what you all have learned along the way as well. So with that in mind, Valerie, you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself and tell us about even maybe how you know Brian?
Sure, you bet. So I am the design director at Fifth Third Bank. Director of Workplace Design is my title, but like lots of titles, it doesn't describe entirely what I do. I'm essentially responsible for the fit, finish, and function of our entire real estate footprint. So all of our spaces, from offices to branches and everything in between. I came to the bank, and I'll say never in a million years imagined myself as a designer working at a bank. But here I am, and I came to the bank from 12 years of workplace consulting. And I came to the bank because, like, why do designers do things? Because there's something to be built. There was something to create. So my background has been in workplace for my entire career. I know Brian because BHDP, the firm that he is with, is our primary go-to firm for workplace design. So we enjoy a really fruitful, outstanding relationship with them.
And Brian, you and I got to know each other through the collaboration with BHDP, and actually Brian has helped me co-teach an innovation class on the future of work, which is quite interesting. We find ourselves experiencing this and talking about this midstream even, as we were in the middle of teaching that class.
Yep.
A global pandemic hit, and we had to send everybody off to their separate corners of the world and still continue to try and study the future of work and make predictions about it. So
I'm Brian Trainer. I'm a lead workplace strategist for BHDP, and it was fun because I actually met Valerie, even though we're both from Cincinnati. We met in Manhattan at a restaurant on the Hudson, looking over the Hudson River for the first time because we were doing a roundtable. And I was like, who's this person? And it was eventually Patrick Donnelly from our firm was like, oh, she's a lead designer for the bank. And I'm like, well, here comes Stuffy McSo-and-so. And I was delightfully surprised to find out she's nothing like that. So instantly I loved being, course corrected by meeting the person and having my expectations blown away. But yeah, as a lead workplace strategist, we like to work with clients like Valerie and try to be more of a business advisor. We're trying to be like a trusted business source. We want to learn about what's driving the success of their operation and what's the organizational culture now, what's the desired future state, what are some of the aspirational goals, and how can we help push their thinking, stretch things out a little bit to make space a better tool for doing work and not just a place where you warehouse folks to get the job done, right? Create better experiences.
Well, and Brian, you're an architect by profession, I guess, or by licensure, right? But would you consider the work that you do with Valerie or even your other clients, are you doing the kinds of things that people usually think an architect do?
No, that's the fun part of it is people come in and they don't know that this is even a part of architecture because not everybody does it, and a lot of practices do it as a separate line business, and we have as well in the past. But we've been working more to integrate with designers where so my background, like you say, is in architecture, but I wasn't the strongest designer. I know that there's people that are better than me. So the idea is to bring those people that have that strong design language in, because I'm really interested in the human behavior side, like how people use space and what motivates folks and gets them excited. And So it's like melding the two. It is a separate piece. There's lots of places that are doing it, but like I said, it's almost a separate practice.
Yeah, and then I think about even, Valerie, you talked about like never in a million years did you think you as a designer would end up as a bank. Uh, do you feel like you're having an opportunity to redefine what being a bank even means, or being a banker, or like how is design making its way into like not just what you're doing, but how are you able to kind of like spread those tentacles out even further into the organization?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. Short answer, yes. Yes. I think design is changing things at the bank. It's changing the way that the bank has worked together historically. The cool thing is that culturally, I mean, there are a lot of great things from a cultural perspective, and you're not wrong, Brian. I think a lot of people think about like, oh, it's a dodgy old bank. Culturally, though, Fifth Third is not that way. I mean, it's very much a culture of collaboration, a culture of listening. If you spent time with our bankers and asked them, well, what makes Fifth Third different, they would tell you that we listen better than anybody in the business. What that means is, for some of our folks in our financial centers, we're wearing suits and ties and skirt suits because that's what our customers expect from a bank. So that there's that listening component. There's a small contingent of designers at the bank, including myself and my team, and then we have a separate team, which is an innovation team that works at the bank as well. And they incubate and explore and develop ideas. They're heavily focused right now because of the pandemic on digital. But yes, I mean, we are definitely changing the way we work at the bank. One of the challenges is in an environment as traditional as ours, it's kind of an upstream swim. So you do a lot of educating, and you do a lot of convincing, and you do a lot of testing and showing that the things that you're proposing are going to work, and you have to back it all up with data, which I am in favor of, certainly because I have a background in metrics and I appreciate sort of the academic rigor behind design work. But it can be a challenge because some of what we do is a little soft, right? I mean, you think about human behavior and why do people behave this way, and why would we collaborate like this versus like this naturally, et cetera. That stuff is a little bit soft, and so the contingent of us making change from a design perspective at the bank are challenged to be able to articulate regularly why we're proposing the things we're proposing.
Yeah. Well, that actually really sets up kind of one of the questions I always like to ask everybody towards the beginning of one of our episodes, and just telling us a little bit about, how innovation and collaboration played a role in your work before COVID-19 and the pandemic. And then as we think about that, that always transitions us into thinking about, so how's that affecting things now? So I think both of you talked a little bit about that, but be curious some of the ways that if you were to step back and really think, okay, what role did collaboration and innovation play before anything that we're dealing with right now? How critical was that, and what ways did it kind of play out to really make your work interesting and effective?
Mm. So for us, we approach workplace design with a very specific and well thought out set of tenets or principles. Some of those principles are based in things like serendipitous encounter is really powerful for innovation, right? I see somebody in the hallway that I didn't plan to see, and it triggers something in my mind, and I go, oh, we should talk about this, or I had this idea, and they do the same with me. And so that kind of serendipitous encounter is really important for innovation. We create workplaces, we create environments that foster those kinds of encounters. So, to your question, like, well, what happens when that goes away? I mean, I have spent some time studying with others in the bank, particularly those working with agile teams, trying to understand what have we been able to replicate and what are we really losing. So in the conversations around agile, for example, you've got artifacts, so displayed thinking on the wall. You've got banter, and then you've got ideation. And artifacts, you can let's back up. We'll start with banter. Banter's not hard. So the teams that have already been working together, that switching to IM or other platforms where they're bantering regularly. Artifacts are not hard to replicate as long as you're okay and your family's okay, basically taking over your dining room or whatever room you're set up in, right? Because you're talking about displayed thinking and swim lanes across the wall from top to bottom and edge to edge. And it's a lot. It's a lot of displayed thinking that those teams immerse themselves in. So you can replicate that. And as I talked with folks in the bank about, well, how's that going? Well, I would say like probably 10 out of 10 with banter, probably 7 out of 10 with artifacts, but that ideation, that behavior where you get 2 or 3 folks go over in a corner and say, oh, let's look at this and let's turn it over and let's think about it all different ways and then go back and develop it further. That they said, maybe a 5 out of 10. Some things are really hard to replicate. Some things we have lost. When you think about even eye contact, right? Like the power of eye contact is that it's reciprocal. So right now, it looks to you like I'm looking at you. And the truth is, I'm looking at a hole at the top of my screen. I can't look at your face at the same time. I cannot look at this camera and see the expression. Like, Aaron, I can see in my periphery that you're nodding. But we've lost the power of reciprocal eye contact. And so because of that, those serendipitous encounters were missing. So teams have tried to replicate it to some degree by, daily calls instead of weekly calls or weekly stand-ups, a daily check-in. But I think for some teams, my own included, like I'm anxious to get back in a room with trash paper and sketch pens and ideate together because things happen differently that way.
Yeah. It's interesting, Valerie, where you're talking about that in-person piece. I don't know if you can see on my wall, there's a bunch of Post-it notes. This is my living room. The kitchen wall, there's more. Because this was the first ideas of a story that I was working on with a couple of people. And that was when you talk, your question of collaboration. The collaboration is big in innovation because there's a point where you have an idea and maybe you get stuck or you're so into the idea that you actually have 10 ideas and you need somebody to help you narrow the focus and say what I really think, what they see, and help hone that perspective. And so it's like, I have an idea for a story, worked on it, threw all the ideas up on a wall, then I created a team and we've been refining the story ever since. And we do that in person here. And on the kitchen wall, there's the timeline and all the subplots. And we tried to replicate that when, during the coronavirus crisis by creating digital Post-it notes. And that works to a degree. But what I realized is through our creative process, there's a part of that that's tactile. It's the ability to, as you're talking about something, physically move and go see the thing. And the digital the collaboration, you're confined to the box. Like I've never felt more sedentary than I do now because I can't move away from the screen and still be interacting with you. So unless the technology is able to elevate that experience, it's going to be completely different. Because I've always, we facilitate a lot of focus groups with clients, and I've always thought that the experience of the people who couldn't be there that day is diminished. And hopefully this brings some awareness to that, because now all of a sudden everybody's empathetic with what it's like to be in a video meeting. And how can we elevate that experience going forward for somebody who maybe can't be in the room that day for whatever reason? I see opportunities here, but I also see that the technology is not quite there, but the potential for it to be, like that eye contact thing, what is it? What if the camera were somehow in the center of the screen and you never saw it? I don't know. And it would look, maybe it would create that feel, but then it's still artificial because, the way we understand depth of space, it's on a flat screen, and you can't avoid that. Plus the camera can distort that perspective. I don't know. So I'm going to ramble. You better bring me back in, Aaron, because I'm going to go crazy on this.
Well, but I think, for one thing, you're talking about like the technology elevating. And I think you are bringing up a really important thing that really speaks even to some of the things Valerie was saying about like the human experience and designing for that feels squishy versus something very data driven, and you make a great point that it's not just about the quality of the audio or the video or anything. It's about the immersive, you know, tactile experience and being able to feel and read the room in a real way. And there's no level of audio enhancement or video clarity that substitutes for that, right? So if we talk about elevating the technology, I think the deeper conversation has to be about elevating what the technology enables, not just that the technology gets 10x better or whatever it may be.
One of the things that we've lost also, not being able to be in a room together, is, for example, I'm a purist as a designer. Purists tend to get married to good ideas really quickly, and we need to be challenged. We need to be pushed to think a little bit differently, like you know, because it is a really good idea, but what about that really good idea? And so I need my team for that. It's one of the things that I need them to do. I need them to be strong and vocal and be willing to challenge me when there's something better or we need to do something a different way. I mean, the design team, both internal at Fifth Third and who works on our account at BHDP would tell you, I am very commonly heard saying, door number 3, guys. It's not 1, it's not 2. Give me door number 3. There's got to be something else. It's much harder for a team to challenge their leader remote when you can't see the face, you can't read the body language. So I now have to say to them when I'm silent, I'm not ignoring you and I did hear you, but I'm processing. If we were in a room together, they could see me because they can see what my face is doing. They can see my eyes are kind of squinting. They kind of can see the wheels turning. And they can also see that I'm not irritated, that I'm open to what they're saying. You lose all of that when you aren't in a room together. And it makes it much more difficult for them to challenge in the way that they need to.
Yeah, I think about like one of the most important things that makes a good brainstorming session work is this idea of yes anding things, right? You know, instead of shutting an idea down or just letting it stall. And so I've found that this summer trying to teach some students through this virtual innovation studio that we're running, where they're students that I've not worked with in person prior. So if you think about the spring, we've worked together and built foundations together in a studio, and then we switched to online and kind of made it work. Now I have a group of students I've never met in person, and a lot of times they haven't met each other in person either. And I'm trying to teach them the tools to do this kind of work and then have them do it all in real time. And I've noticed that the yes and is a lot harder when you're on a virtual whiteboard with sticky notes that are virtual and you don't have that ability to even see like, oh, I'm looking over here and I see Brian's got an idea. He's just jumping at the seams waiting to like come out with his version of yes and then this person. It becomes the ideas get it rolling so quickly that we can't keep up. And instead it's usually this like, okay, whose turn is it to say yes and, right?
Yeah.
Because part of that interjection is body language.
And it's doing it digitally, there's a more deliberate thought and planning that has to go into even being, you know, creating some sort of creative session. And it takes a little bit longer and it takes more people because we've done roundtables and the behind the scene folks were equal in number to the people, you know, the faces that you saw. So I think we did one where we had 50 some, you were in that. There were 8 people behind the scenes just to make sure that the flow kept going, and we had to practice it ahead of time. We even set some things up with a client where we had stuff that all used theater settings where we're saying, all right, we're going to do some blocking to figure out who's going to be in control of what. We're going to do a rehearsal and then we're going live. And then we even did a set strike after where we debriefed on, you know, what we did and what we could do better for next time. And it takes a lot of folks, but we're also not traveling. So while it on the surface seems more expensive, it was actually probably about the same, which is kind of wild when you think about it. So it's an interesting dynamic to try and do things digital. But you know, part of the creative process too, like I was saying, Rachel, who's one of the writers that we're working with, she is one of the most physically animated human beings. When she gets excited, there's a physicality to her creativity. And she gets an idea and she jumps up out of her chair and she'll grab a kitchen cabinet door and slam it 3 times. She'll be like, oh, here's what we need to do, you know, and then she like marches back and forth as she's sharing the idea. And then I'm just trying to write as fast as possible and then we go back through what she just said and find the really good things. Because sometimes creativity, you need to meander a little bit. and it's hard to meander when it's a scheduled meeting and you have to sit still. This is like every kindergartner's nightmare. Sit on your little carpet square and don't move for 8 hours a day. And we all need to unleash the inner kindergartner to get to our creative side, right?
That's a great analogy. It's actually making me think about too. So I have a student this summer that I had set up a research project with prior to the pandemic as well. And fortunately, she was still able to, have the project funded and be a part of it and everything. But it dramatically changed what we thought it would look like, because it was going to be a more qualitative research project where we would be doing exactly what you're describing, like let's run a focus group, and then I'm going to teach you how to use Post-its to rapidly take top line kind of thoughts and everything. And now it's been kind of reduced down to, she's in Detroit and I'm here, and what can we do by meeting on this small screen a couple times a week? And I think one of the hardest things to help to try and help her understand, because the big goal was to help teach her how to do this qualitative research in the design environment, and try to help her understand the difference between like confining it down to the homework you do before we meet and then we have our meeting and then that's it, to this idea of like always being in the flow and looking for inspiration and listening for cues. And I think that's a hard thing to ask a 19-year-old to do, and it's still hard then to ask even a 45-year-old to do, right? Like it's just not natural unless
Yeah.
you've really kind of lived that before. And even if you have, there's still something lost by not having that. So I do think there's something to saying if we're going to find ways to not just try and recreate what used to work in person digitally, that's going to plateau. And maybe a lot of us have found that even like we're going to have to actually do things differently and let go of some of those, or at least pause them and then see what comes out on the other side of this, right?
Yeah, that's some of the tools that we've been using, like Miro, for example, which is a really robust tool for engagement because you can do index cards and post-it notes and draw things on it if you want to, which is nice. But to me, that's kind of the putting a motor in a carriage and calling it a car. You say there's something next. There's something next that's better than that. And I don't know if it's like a virtual environment where you just put on glasses and suddenly, or it's augmented reality where, I'm putting Post-it notes on my wall and Valerie could see them popping up behind her in her house and she could move hers around too. So I think there's a next Star Trek level adventure to be had that we're not there yet, but maybe it's coming.
I mean, I think there are no lines, right? There really are no lines in design. I just had this conversation yesterday with a team that we were working on some things for retail branches. We've been asked to think about post-COVID or in the midst of COVID still, if we have a resurgence or whatever. What do we think about the work we've done to date on our branches? And so we're kind of defining like now, next, future. And one of the things we talked about is like, well, let's just remind the steering committee, there is no line. There's no, as we explore next, we're going to discover things that apply to now, and we're going to start putting them into action. We're going to find some things that are going to be future that where we're going to go, you know what, that's probably too far out there, either in terms of bandwidth and effort or in terms of spend. And so there's no line. I mean, at best, it's a line in the sand that's washed away with the wave of every new conversation in an organization like ours, right? As new things come on the radar. And I think much of the kind of work that we do is that way, where it's very hard when, to your point, Aaron, I mean, at one time we were going to have these very collaborative interactions, meetings together where we were going to have working sessions. And now you have to do your prep and you have to come prep, and then we're going to do this, and then you're going to go away and process it. It's a really different way to work through a challenge, a problem. And it's a really unnatural way for designers to work through problems.
Well, thinking about your role even, Valerie, and, this idea of, creating spaces that enable and facilitate that within a physical place, I've got to imagine that some of your thoughts are around not only, how do we still function and be productive through this, but also like, what am I going to try and set as a vision for our team when the way space is used will probably have to look different for at least the short term, if not medium or even long term?
Yeah, I think in my favor is that I already had set a vision for my team to focus this year on modeling empathy and enhancing communication. So essentially over communicating and then saying, look, team, design is a naturally empathetic discipline. We will model empathy for our part of the organization. So we're within a larger department called Enterprise Workplace Services. We have process people, we have construction and project management folks. We have a multitude of disciplines within that, and then there's the design team. And again, operating as this little team in this broader, more traditional environment. And we had already said, we're going to model empathy and we're going to communicate better than anybody in the organization. I think that those things are still relevant. And I also think that the power of place is as relevant as it has ever been. Mm-hmm. So, like Brian, you talked about technology, and can we come to some Star Trek way of being in a room together? Maybe. And there may, if we do, be instances where that's good and relevant and helpful, but should we use it all the time? And I would say no. I mean, I still go back to the reality that we're wired for communication, or for connection, excuse me. And even now, as we're starting to bring people back into the office environment, we're saying, I am not going to sit 6 feet away from you and get on a WebEx with you. I mean, people are naturally not going to do that. Now, you will have some people who are very nervous about their health, or who are at high risk, or they have loved ones at home at high risk, and so they may do that. Most of the population, though, will kind of revolt against that and say, you know what, can we just get in a room, please? and I'll go to the board, and then I'll step way back, and then you can go to the board, and we'll figure out how to make it work. But can we just get in a room? So we're saying, how do we create some collaborative spaces that still allow people to distance? But we know when we're in the office together, we want to be together. Part of the power of place is that I can actually connect with other human beings. If I don't need that, then I can be home all the time, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's interesting too to look at when you talk about empathy. We have multiple major events happening, not just a pandemic, but we're going through a cultural awakening, I hope, and it's not just a blip on the radar. That we shake the foundations of how we treat other human beings, starting with empathy. But as a subset of that, you have to, if you look back historically at major things that changed the way we think about physical space, it required some sort of catalyst. And sometimes that catalyst was a terrible event. Like here in Cincinnati, the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, made us think about the way doors get locked or not locked as modes of egress because people were trapped inside. There's a reason why exterior doors open out. It's because in case of a crisis, people can escape the building. We start thinking, the ADA set up guidelines for accessibility for people who are non-ambulatory or other things. And maybe this is a spot in time through the pandemic to be more aware of people who are immunocompromised that maybe can't come into a workplace. Well, are we really waiting for things to go back to business as normal, or is there an opportunity here to create something completely different where we say, the workspace is a healthy work environment for everyone, and maybe it's pandemic ready in case it happens again? So like, what are things that we can, adapt now that could become permanent later? And how do we change that thinking? Right. And I know, tech is one piece of that where, in like sensor technology, they're talking about monitoring air quality, but then you make it personal to where I can come in and I can log in and say, all right, the air quality is good today. I feel okay. I'm going to go in. There's too many people in the lunch line. I'm not going there right now. How can we adapt? And make it personal so people have that sense of psychological security. Because there is pieces of the population that we just presume we can't do it because we've never done it before. Right. But the same thing happened with this. There were companies that said, well, our employees can't work remotely. Well, suddenly that paradigm was shifted on its head when they were forced to learn how if they wanted business continuity. And, the people that tried are having more success than the people that were like, nope, we can't do this at all. And what else can we challenge? So what's door number 3, like Valerie said? Hey, we said we couldn't work remote. Now we can. What else did we say we could never do? Like, what else are we going to push? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just putting it into somebody's hands personally of their felt safety. It's also that now it's something I can control, right? Like people want, especially in the United States, culturally, we don't want people telling us what to do or where to be or when to be there. I think that's one of the things. I mean, as I started to have conversations with various folks at BHDP and elsewhere, when we all were sent home, like, well, what are we learning? And the more that I dug in and the more folks that I talked to within the bank and externally, the conclusion I came to is, in some ways, nothing has changed. We want to be able to have the choice of where to work, when to work there, and how to work, and to be trusted to know when the right choice is being made, right? Like, I don't want to be all the time at home. I don't want to be all the time at work. I want to be trusted to know that as an adult, I can make the right decision on the right day. And that's really what people have always wanted in terms of flexibility, and it's what they still want. And I think we've proven, especially now that I think individually we know ourselves a little bit better, right? Like you've got people that thought they could work at home all the time and they're going, oh, not what I thought. I am not as productive. You have people that thought that they couldn't work at home and they're going, actually there are things I like about this. So I would expect a huge shift for a lot of people to say, like, en masse, for us as a society to say, probably not going to quite go back to the way it was. Maybe I was in 5 days a week, and maybe it's going to be 3 from now on, or 2.5, or 4, or a half a day, or and there be an openness for that level of choice.
Yeah, and helping folks through, bringing it back to empathy, people who are working from home that have maybe small kids, like Aaron, yourself, and knowing there are points of time where you really need to focus on that little human that you're trying to raise. And it's okay to not be working in the middle of scheduled, structured work hours because, there's a life that you're taking care of, or multiples. And that's why when you talk about what Valerie was saying, I heard autonomy. People want that sense of, I will get this done, and I need you to trust that I will get it done, but I'm not going to do it between 8 and 5. I might not start until 6 o'clock when a kid's, taking a nap or watching TV or whatever. And that's okay. And that should be okay, because for several hours during the day, I was spending time with my family. And so, that work-life balance is completely destroyed because it's all completely overlapped at this point. And I think there's a lot of people feeling very guilty because they feel like they're not dedicating that time, and we need to be able to shift that paradigm. And like one of the groups said in the innovation class that we do, Aaron, what if we change the clock? What if we remove 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, whatever? Sorry, I went Dolly Parton on that one. 9 to 5, but you get the point. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's so good. Well, and I think you're both talking about some of the things that I always like to try and prompt us to think about. And in light of what we're learning through all of this, what are your bold predictions for the future of how this will play out? I know there's a lot of what ifs, or I'm seeing some of this, but do you have any really bold, kind of thought-provoking predictions of, I think this is likely to come out of what we've learned here, what the situation has caused?
I've thought often, I hope we're learning the right things. As I've watched things unfold, one of my predictions is we are going to go back to some semblance of what we used to know as normal. I am seeing a pretty significant revolt against the idea of new normal. I work for somebody who is a people person. I have these visions of him standing in his home office, looking out the window with his hand up on one pane and kind of a tear coming out. The people are gone from my life. He will not accept a world where we never shake hands again. It's not okay. And I don't think that we can sustain that. Humanity cannot sustain that, I don't believe. If you look at studies around, like hugging your children, and how when you physically touch your children in positive ways, hugs and a pat on the shoulder and these kinds of things, they thrive more than if you don't, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not suggesting anybody pat me on the head when I go into the office, but we're wired for those kinds of connections. We're wired for proximity. So my prediction is that will there be some sustained changes? Yes. I mean, some of the things that we've seen retailers do, where you have an hour on either end of the day where it's specifically designated for people who are particularly vulnerable from a health perspective. Those are good things. Maybe we keep those things because it's thoughtful and it's helpful, and it's a good thing to do. And collectively, we say, let's carry that forward. Maybe there is an enhanced focus on wellness in the work environment in the same way that it's happening in retail to protect a certain part of the population. That's good and reasonable. We can't. Here's what I said to all of our department last week. If you think about the social change that we need to make right now, some things that we need to rectify historically, and I'm very sensitive to this because I have a multi-ethnic family, and I don't want this world for my son or yours, your children. We cannot solve these problems standing 6 feet away from each other.
Yeah.
We can't. So what it looks like in detail, I don't know, but there will be a return to something like the normal we used to know. There's a little bit of a revolution against new normal in this idea that we're just not going to be able to physically be in proximity in the same way. I don't believe it. I don't think we can sustain this level of separation, and we certainly can't solve the problems we need to solve standing this far apart.
I think
Yeah.
there's an interesting point in that too, of like going back to the empathy part and all the things we've talked about humans, right? Is that when it comes to new normal, well, one thing that hasn't changed out of what we're saying we have to adjust to is that there will still be people involved, right? And innate human characteristics and desires and the ways we're wired has not changed, despite the fact that our environment has changed around us. So I think it's a great point to think about, is that new normal as in things that we have to adapt because of realities that are external to us, but the internal intrinsic desires, or the fact that you can't solve some problems from 6 feet apart, like, yeah, those things won't change regardless of what the external stimuli or constraints or anything else are, right? So what are the parts of being human that will always win? Like, what will those be? And those won't change, because you can historically look, and there are some things about being human that have always been the same, no matter
Right.
what the external constraints or limitations or lack of technology or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Valerie's one of the people that I quote the most without her probably knowing it, but she did a podcast with us where I asked her, how do you future-proof design? Knowing that business changes, yearly, monthly, and whatever. And she said, the key is to design for basic human needs, because those never change. She's like, that's the only thing that you can prove future-proof, is knowing what people need. That you're right, the problem, we're not going to be able to solve it unless people lock arms. And folks have shown that by going out to protests where, yeah, there's a global pandemic, you're putting your life at risk, and it's that important, and so people are motivated to go out and do something because it needs people. And we can't just sit and protest online, because social media has proven an ineffective way of changing people's minds. They just go for the thing that shores up their bias. But if I were to make some predictions on the future, I think it's interesting. Some of the ideas that happened in the class that I want to go back to are our future of work class. The previous semester, there was one group that was challenging folks to say, if you could get 2 hours of your day back from your commute time, what would you do at that time? And they sent it out as a survey, and they had trouble getting results because people couldn't imagine not driving to work.
Well, they can now.
They can now. I know, like, oh my God, I want to run that survey again. Like, find those kids, the students, be like, let's do this again. Because it's amazing. That's a really short window of time from last winter to now. People couldn't imagine not driving to work, and now suddenly, very, very few people were. But the other two groups were talking about AI and the interface. And if you think about creating an environment where you can't touch anything, AI becomes a big piece of that. And it enables you to be able to operate with some sense of normalcy in the office, because one company's there's Bluetooth coffee makers where you can send your order to the machine and then go over with your cup and put it under. And so you don't touch anything on the machine. You just touch your personal cup and your phone. So I see more touchless environments like that. Of course, I want my automatic doors, but then if you bring Star Wars into it and you look at the holographic images of people talking, but then you really go to the first series where you've got the Jedi Council and there's a couple people that have called in from other places, but it looks like they're sitting in their chair. How fun could that be? And maybe there's a next level technology camera where you can walk around a room, but it's only recording the person and it takes the background out and puts you into an environment. So I see being able to use immersive environments that create some type of tactile response where you can have that physicality, where it feels like the person's next to you and maybe not, because it includes more people than it excludes. And maybe it's just one or two people that are virtual and everybody else is in the room because they still need that. Because I can go for long periods of time without folks, but I know people that are really struggling. Like Patrick is very much a people person, and you can see him physically struggling.
He's got
with
the
not being
cheer and standing at the window too, right? Yeah.
He's our guy at the window. And the weird part is he's in a house with a lot of people because he has a large family. So he's not away from all people. He just likes to be connected to all people, so he's not physically alone. He just feels alone through work because he's sitting in this frame.
Right. I do think that's a valid prediction, Brian, too, partly because even when we do return to proximity, there may still be some residual limitations around travel.
Mm-hmm.
So, the design manager who works for me on my team is in Charlotte. And she's like, okay, Valerie, I get it. We're returning. I don't know if I'm ready to travel or if I'm going to be in a month or 2 months. And I've kind of said, look, I'm not going to push you to do anything you're not comfortable with. I believe in distributed work as something that we can do and we can do well. And so let's evaluate it in a month. Let's evaluate it in 2 months. But I think there may be some people who experience this like, yeah, most people have returned, but we've got some folks that are distributed that they can't yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good. The other thing that I see happening that I hope will last a while is there's a little bit of a pulling back on the focus on density in the work environment. So for a long time, based on how people behave in the environment, we've been able to say, oh yeah, you can get this many people in here actually because we know they're not going to be there at the same time, and we know kind of how people interact and move around, and if we give them shared spaces and encourage them to use them, then they're not at their desk, and that means that other people can use their desk, right? All the things that go into creating density in a positive way. When you get some voices involved in that conversation that are very focused on cost of real estate, et cetera, they tend to push density at the expense of some other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pressure is coming off a lot right now. And I think that it's going to stay off for a pretty strong period of time. I would say my prediction, this is Valerie's opinion in a vacuum, I'll bet more than 18 months. I'll bet it's more than 18 months before we maybe even 24 before we see anybody saying, you know what, we need to densify again.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo that too, because some of the things we know that the closest we could be to even a vaccine, you've got to talk about something where we're post-vaccine. Plus, if you look at some of the recent pandemics, the frequency has increased of a new virus coming. You've got SARS and H1N1, all of the different ones, and now here we are at coronavirus. How do you prepare for if there's another one in 2 to 5 years? And so, do you really want to go back to cramming people in and then have to send everybody home? So there's got to be door number 3. I'm going to use that now. See, I'm quoting Valerie again already. Where's door number 3?
What's happening?
Door number 3 has worked for me for a long time, Brian.
Yeah, I like that. I like that very much.
Well, and now, Valerie, you're getting properly credited at least.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Brian, you were talking about something earlier earlier that happened in one of the previous classes that I've had a conversation with someone else about this recently too, and the idea of how, pre-pandemic, had these groups talking about AI, and a couple of them 2 semesters ago really did a deep dive on what they thought AI might do through the workplace. And it was what I liked about it was that they approached it as 20 to 22-year-olds. They approached it not from the mindset of the fear mongering of AI is going to steal our jobs, but they were actually trying to look at opportunities for what that would cause and create. And I remember some of them talking about this concept of like shifting the needle from people seeing AI as a job stealer or a competitive, thing against them, and seeing it as a collaborator. In fact, there was like this image that one group used in their final presentation of like a fist bump between this mechanical Terminator hand and a human hand, and that like
Yeah.
became the catalyzing image for what they were ultimately saying. Like, in order for this stuff to really be fully leveraged, this attitude has to be embraced, right? And at the time, I remember thinking like, we're probably 20 years away. We're 2 decades away from people getting over that hump and thinking this thing is actually a tool that enables collaboration, and I'm going to treat an AI like a coworker versus like a tool that I can know what to do. And I do wonder if part of what we've experienced through this mass rapid adaptation to technology enabling every single part of our life and like needing to use it just to get our jobs done, there's part of me that thinks that we're going to accelerate that transition to people seeing technology and non-human tools as coworkers or vital parts of their day that maybe otherwise they would have taken 20 years to adapt to. That's my bold prediction for what it's worth. I don't know how either of you feel about that.
No, I think so too. The home automation is people are going to get comfortable with it at their homes. They're going to want it in the workplace. And that's a lot of technology has been flipped on its head because people can walk in the door with better tech in their pockets than they're given to do their job sometimes, So that whole we provide the device and you work on it idea might go away, but then what automation could you bring? I know that Microsoft had invested in a technology company, I want to say maybe 2 years ago. The ideas were, if you think about a raised floor being a square module, there's sensors within each square that monitor air quality and temperature, and they work on maintaining that constant level of human comfort. That could be done with the technology exists, and people are building it in their homes with the Arduino kits and stuff. Like, they're creating their own air quality monitors in their space. It's not far behind for that technology to catch up and be integrated, and once it's produced in mass will become affordable and not just a novelty, but it'll lend to that psychological safety that people need to feel comfortable to come back. Because I know our office is opening from the date of this recording, it'll be next week. When they're opening and with reduced capacity, people have scheduled days, so there's guaranteed only 50%. We're still not allowing visitors to come in, and it's optional. And they're like, do you want us to turn your parking pass back on? I'm like, don't bother. I won't be coming in. I'm not going to be one of the folks, because it seems like we're at a point in history where we've turned a corner and it's a cave with no light in it. And we're like, who's going to go first and figure out what the future is? And they're going to be those bold folks that go spelunking into the dark cavern that maybe find the pirate's treasure or plummet to their death. But we got to try things that we've never tried before, and we can't build off of things we've learned from before because this is uncharted territory.
The interesting thing about AI, Aaron, I think is not so much the taking of jobs, right? AI is not going to do my landscaping. I am always going to need a person to do that, or a crew of people. We had a crew of 6 guys here a week and a half ago doing landscaping work for us. AI is not going to do that. And if you look at the way that jobs have evolved, and just some of the statistics around every year, the one that I heard last year or the year before was like every year, 1.5% of jobs are new, brand new. Not nurses needing more nurses, but a brand new job that nobody had ever heard of before.
Mm-hmm.
If you compound that over 5 years, then we've got students coming out of college who thought they knew what they were going to do, and the landscape already looks different. So I think that the bigger conversation that's going to develop around AI and that is already developing is really not so much around jobs, because if you understand that the labor market, you understand that's not as much of an issue as people have thought, but it's really around data. Who's using my data? Who now has information that they don't need about me? And maybe today that's benign, but tomorrow, under the wrong, in the wrong hands, it's not so benign. So, okay, if you take my temperature, sure, that's fine. But at what point are people who, I mean, we're having things, conversations right now around censorship on social media, right? Like, Western medicine is not the only way to create health. There are some who believe it's not the best way to create health. And if you listen to only Western medicine resources, you'd censor everything else. And is that really a good thing? I would argue that it's not. Now, the challenge is you got a lot of garbage out there too. And so you got to figure out, how do you filter the garbage, right? This is why it's important to teach our children how to filter garbage, because they're going to need to. But the point is just, the bigger question around AI is, what about the data, and what use of data about me am I willing to accept? About you, are you willing to accept? Who's using it? How are they using it? And is that okay with us? Because some of that, we're going to have to make some concessions if we're going to use AI to the extent that it could be useful.
Yep.
Well, I feel like we've ran a lot of places. We've talked about, densifying and de-densifying offices, whether or not AI can do landscaping. What haven't we covered at this point, right? Is there anything that either of you kind of wanted to leave us with, or other closing thoughts that would be important for us that we haven't had a chance to discuss?
Like where this coat came from? No.
Well, I was going to ask you, actually. I didn't want to hijack a really deep.
No, that's a great conversation.
Mic drop moment, but I feel like that's a worthwhile question. Brian, you got to tell us the story.
Well, I had to wear this coat because I knew I was going to be sharing time with Valerie, and she's so much smarter than I am that I had to have something to draw away from my lack of content. So I needed to create visual interest. So
this is lesson number one in filtering garbage. Not smarter. I'm not smart.
No, well, yeah. The story of this coat is we were doing an Arts Wave fundraiser at work, and they asked me to MC for a live auction. We were going to do a live auction of artwork that folks had created. And I have a very famous coat that's from Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and I think you have to be over 40 to know what that is. But it was a gift from Marlon Perkins in the 70s or whatever, and it's got animal heads all over it. I didn't want to wear the coat that everybody had seen before, so I ordered this because it felt like Arts Wave, and turned out it was coming from China, and China had been hit by the coronavirus before us, and so it took about 2 months before it got here. So I didn't get to wear it for the auction, but now I just take every chance that I can to wear it, since I knew I was going to be looked at today. But yeah, this was my Arts Wave coat that I didn't get to wear for Arts Wave.
I love that we were able to give you the opportunity to do that. I feel like if nothing else comes from this, that'll be an important part of.
That'll be my.
Yeah, that'll be
my Steely moment. I think my final thought would be it's a challenging time that has a lot of people in fear, but it also feels really exciting because it is an opportunity to really look at things that we've never looked at before, examine them in new ways, maybe create whole new solutions. And so I'm looking for those people who revel in disruption, because that's part of innovation. We've been comfortable with iterative innovation up to this point, and now there's this huge disruption. So what's the next revolutionary thing going to be? And to me, that's exciting, because I'm a futurist. If you go to my strengths finders, that's one of my top 5. I'm what's next? What new thing can we do? And it's weird to me, if you look at science fiction has influenced a lot of the technology we use today. But one of the things that always kind of, I think, is interesting is there's a presumed assumption in most science fiction that we'll figure out artificial gravity. And nobody's really figured out artificial gravity yet, but we assume it's going to happen. So, are there other things that we assume are going to get fixed? I don't know. Where's the new challenges? Who are our new pioneers? And what problems are they going to solve that we didn't even know that we had yet? So,
in our last episode, one of the guests actually likened this to, he had a similar sort of positive outlook on what could happen here. And he actually talked about looking back at post-World War II and how everyone kind of emerged from this thing with a new outlook on what was possible, putting aside old ways of thinking and everything. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of analogous way to even start looking at and thinking well, let's look and see how did people behave then? And what were the innovations that came out of that? What were the societal changes that came afterwards? And then wondering, what does that, extrapolate that out, what's that look like now, several decades later?
Yeah.
I used to tell when I lived in Michigan, which is where I'm from, I taught senior level interior students, and I taught at a time when our last recession was pretty hot. And so I had students graduating into a recession. And I used to tell them, you actually don't have to participate in the recession. You get to choose. If you can articulate your value in the marketplace, you will find work. Now, what I would say is, you don't have to participate in the anxiety. You get to choose. And so now is the time. Take a deep breath. Be thoughtful about the things that are happening. Create some points of view that are yours. Sort of plant your feet and forge ahead. You don't have to participate in the anxiety.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great analogy and great closing kind of thought even. So, Brian, Valerie, thank you both. Thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Staying engaged mentally, in all the things that are going on too, and not checking out. So I knew I could count on you both to be a part of that. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Good to see your faces. I can't.
Yes, likewise.
Aaron, we've never hugged before, but it's going to happen if I ever get to see you again. Just so you know.
Maybe you can even wear that coat for the hug.
Bring it in, big fella. Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, thank you both. Keep doing what you're doing, and we want to thank everybody who's tuning in to check out these shows. And if there's interesting ideas or thoughts that this provokes for you, please reach out, share that on the various social channels that you see us on. Comment in the comments section wherever it is that you end up viewing this program. So thank you, Cincinnati Bell, also for sponsoring and making this happen, and sort of choosing to also embrace the ambiguity of this moment and say, well, what kind of content could we put out, and how could we creatively look at a way to facilitate interesting conversations about what's happening in our local community and what's going to happen. So thank you for that, Cincinnati Bell. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today, and we will look forward to seeing you next time.